The great trading station above Vornith Prime never slept. Ships from 100 worlds moved through its wide docking arms at all hours, carrying goods, soldiers, and rumors in equal amounts. Under its huge glass domes, delegates from a dozen species argued, laughed, and made deals that would decide the fate of entire systems. Among them walked one figure that many still could not agree how to treat. Ambassador Elias Ward had spent almost a year on this station, ever since Earth signed its first treaty with the Vornith Empire. Some of the older delegates looked at him the way one might look at a strange animal that had wandered too far from home. Others refused to look at him at all, afraid that speaking too kindly to a member of an unranked species might hurt their own standing at court. Ward did not let any of this bother him. In his many years as a diplomat, he had learned that being underestimated was often the safest place a person could stand. It meant no one watched him too closely. It meant he could listen, and there was a great deal to listen to. The Vornith Empire ruled over more than 40 star systems, and it liked to remind every visitor of that fact. Its halls were lined with banners showing conquered worlds. Its officers wore medals for battles fought against species that no longer existed. The Empire called itself a protector of order in the galaxy. Ward had begun to notice that order, to the Vornith, meant one thing only: obedience. On this particular morning, Ward sat in the long trade chamber, listening to Vornith officials argue over new shipping routes near Earth's outer colonies. The routes, they said, were needed for peaceful trade expansion. Ward had read the actual flight logs. The ships requesting passage were not cargo haulers. They were troop transports, listed under false registry numbers. He said nothing about this in the chamber. Instead, he asked polite questions about cargo capacity and delivery schedules, the kind of questions a harmless diplomat might ask. The Vornith officials answered smoothly, clearly used to humans asking small, unimportant things. After the session ended, Ward returned to his private office on the station, a narrow room with a single window looking out over the curve of Vornith Prime below. He sat down and began writing his report, the way he had every week for the past year. This time, the report was different. He wrote about the false registry numbers. He wrote about 3 other systems where small, weak species had lost their independence to the Empire in the last 2 years, always after a period of friendly trade talks that ended the same way. He wrote about patrol patterns near Earth's border colonies that had grown thicker every month, despite the peace treaty promising the opposite. At his side, a young engineer named Sten Larkin worked at a second terminal, running system checks on the embassy's communication array. Sten had been assigned to Ward's staff only a few months earlier, fresh from Earth's academy, still amazed that he was allowed to walk the halls of an alien empire's capital. "You look worried," Sten said, glancing over. "I am," Ward admitted, "but not for myself." Sten waited, but Ward did not explain further. Some things, the ambassador had decided, were safer left unsaid until he was certain. That certainty came 3 days later. A courier from the Vornith court arrived at Ward's office without warning, carrying a message stamped with the seal of Commander Rask, the Empire's chief enforcer. The message was short. Ambassador Ward was requested to attend a special session of the court to answer questions regarding irregularities in his private communications with Earth. Ward read the message twice. He had encrypted every report he sent home. There should have been no way for the Vornith court to know their contents unless someone inside Earth's own embassy had leaked them, or unless the Empire's spies were far better than anyone on Earth had guessed. He did not sleep well that night. Not from fear, exactly, but from the slow, cold understanding that the peace talks he had spent a year building might have never been real at all. He thought of the false troop transports, the disappearing small worlds, the patrol ships gathering near Earth's colonies like wolves circling a herd that did not yet know it was being hunted. In the morning, Ward dressed in his formal uniform and looked at himself in the narrow mirror of his office. He was not a soldier. He had never carried a weapon in his life. But he understood, in that moment, that the words he chose in the next few hours might matter more than any weapon Earth possessed. He called Sten Larkin into the room. "If anything happens to me today," Ward said quietly, "you get a message to Earth, no matter what it costs." Sten's face went pale. "Ambassador, what's going on?" Ward placed a small data chip into the young engineer's hand and closed his fingers around it. "Everything I know. Everything I've seen. If I don't come back from this session, You send it. Immediately. No delays, no permissions, no waiting for orders. Sten nodded slowly, though his hand was shaking. Ward straightened his coat, walked to the door, and stepped out into the station's crowded halls, moving toward the court chamber where Commander Rask was waiting. Around him, the station carried on as it always did, full of noise and trade and 1,000 small deals. None of the delegates passing by knew they were watching the last free morning of a war that had not yet begun. The court chamber where Commander Rask held his private sessions had no windows. Vornith architects had designed it that way on purpose, so that anyone brought before the commander would have no view of the sky, no sense of time passing, nothing to hold on to except the questions being asked of them. Ambassador Elias Ward stood in the center of the room, alone, while a ring of armored guards watched from the shadows along the walls. Commander Rask sat above him on a raised seat, his long fingers tapping slowly against the armrest. "You have been busy, Ambassador," Rask said. His voice was calm, almost friendly, which made it worse. "Writing reports, asking questions about our shipping routes, studying our patrol patterns." "I am a diplomat," Ward answered. "Understanding the empire I serve alongside is part of my duty." "Is it your duty to accuse an empire of 40 worlds of dishonesty?" Ward kept his face still. "I have made no accusations, Commander." Rask's fingers stopped tapping. "Not yet." The commander rose from his seat and stepped down until he stood only a few feet from Ward, close enough that Ward could see the old scars along the alien's jaw, marks from wars fought long before Earth had even sent its first ship into deep space. "Let me be honest with you, Ambassador, since you value honesty so much," Rask said. "Your species was never meant to become an equal partner of this empire. You were meant to become a resource, a quiet, useful colony at the edge of our territory. That was always the plan. The peace treaty was simply the fastest way to get your world to lower its guard." For a long moment, Ward said nothing. Somewhere behind his calm expression, every fear he had carried for the past year settled into certainty. "Then why tell me now?" Ward asked. Rask smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Because it no longer matters what you know. You will not be leaving this station to share it." Two guards stepped forward and gripped Ward's arms. He did not struggle. Struggling would waste the only thing he had left, time. "Commander," Ward said, his voice steady, "killing me will not stop Earth from learning the truth eventually. It will only teach them not to trust you sooner." "Then let it be a lesson," Rask replied, "for every small species watching." As the guards began to move him toward a side door, Ward's mind raced, not with panic, but with calculation. He had trained Sten Larkin for exactly this kind of moment, though neither of them had truly believed it would come. The data chip, the message, everything depended now on whether that message could reach Earth before the Empire realized what had been sent. He was brought to a small transmission alcove built into the side of the execution hall, a place reserved for final statements, a tradition the Vornith used to remind prisoners that their last words would be recorded and broadcast as a warning to others. Rask clearly intended to use Ward's death the same way. But Ward understood something Rask did not. A recorded broadcast meant for the galaxy could also become a message meant for home. When the recording light blinked on, Ward looked directly into the camera, not with fear, but with the calm, steady voice of a man who had already accepted what was coming. "To Earth," he said, "and to whoever else is listening. My name is Elias Ward. I came here believing peace was possible. I was wrong, but not about humanity's chance to survive. I was wrong to trust an empire that never intended to keep its word." He listed, quickly and clearly, the coordinates of the hidden Vornith fleet buildups near Earth's colonies. He explained the false troop transports disguised as cargo ships. He confirmed, in plain words, that the Empire's real plan had always been conquest, not partnership. "They believe fear will stop you," Ward continued. "It will not. Earth has spent years preparing for exactly this moment, whether we admitted it to ourselves or not. Do not wait for permission to defend what is yours. Do not wait for another warning. This is the only one you will get from me." Rask's guards moved to cut the transmission, but it was already too late. Far across the station, in a small embassy office, Sten Larkin had received the encrypted signal the moment it left the alcove, exactly as Ward had planned, using a private channel the Vornith did not know existed. Moments later, In front of the gathered court and every delegate the Empire wished to intimidate, Ambassador Elias Ward was executed, exactly as Commander Rask intended, as a lesson to every small species watching. But lessons, Rask would soon learn, depend entirely on who is doing the listening. Millions of light years away, on a quiet planet called Earth, a message was arriving that would change everything. Sten Larkin did not remember deciding to run. One moment he was staring at his terminal, watching the ambassador's final words scroll across the screen, and the next he was sprinting through the embassy's narrow halls, the data chip gripped so tightly in his hand that its edges cut into his palm. Station security would come for the human embassies soon. Rask would not allow the source of the leak to walk free, not after what had just aired to every delegate on the station. Sten reached the embassy's small transport bay, sealed the door behind him, and dropped into the pilot's seat of the only ship still cleared for departure, a modest supply shuttle meant for cargo runs, never designed for a desperate escape. He did not wait for clearance. He launched straight into open space, alarms flashing across every panel, and set a course for the nearest relay station capable of reaching Earth directly. Behind him, the trade station where Ambassador Ward had spent his final year grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the dark. On Earth, in a secure command center beneath the United Nations building, the message arrived just after midnight local time. Counselor Priya Nair was still at her desk when the alert came through, the same broadcast that had aired across Vornith space, now reaching Earth's monitoring networks through 3 separate relays, confirmed and reconfirmed within minutes. She watched the recording twice before calling anyone. The first call went to Admiral Grace Holt, commander of a fleet that, officially, did not exist. For years, Earth's governments had maintained 2 separate faces to the galaxy: a small, unarmed diplomatic presence, and a second, hidden defense program built quietly in the outer solar system, funded and developed under strict secrecy ever since first contact with the Vornith Empire 5 years earlier. Holt answered on the second ring, already awake, already aware that something had happened. "You've seen it," Nair said. "I've seen it," Holt replied. Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice of someone who had spent years preparing for a call exactly like this one. "Coordinates check out. Fleet buildups match patrol gaps we've been tracking for months. Then it's real." "It was always going to be real," Holt said. "We just didn't want to believe it." By morning, the recording had spread across every major news network on Earth. The galaxy had watched Ward's execution as a warning against defiance. Earth watched it as something else entirely, proof, finally, undeniable and public, of exactly what humanity's leaders had quietly feared since the very first treaty was signed. Nair addressed the United Nations that afternoon, and for the first time, she told the public the truth. Earth had never fully trusted the peace with the Vornith Empire. Ships had been built. Weapons had been developed. Colonies had been quietly reinforced. None of it had ever been used, because none of it had ever been needed, until now. "We do not do this for revenge," Nair told the assembly, her voice carrying across every screen on the planet. "We do this because Ambassador Ward gave his life to make sure we would not have to guess what was coming. He gave us a warning. It is our duty to answer it." Admiral Holt was granted full authority within the hour. Meanwhile, far from Earth, the broadcast had reached other ears as well. Small species scattered across Vornith territory, worlds that had lived for generations under the Empire's quiet threats and sudden disappearances, watched the same recording with a very different kind of attention. They had seen this pattern before, friendly trade talks followed by conquest, though none of them had ever had proof so clear or a voice so steady, speaking the truth out loud in front of the entire court. Within days, encrypted messages began arriving at Earth's monitoring stations from worlds that had never dared contact humanity directly before. They offered information, star charts, weaknesses in Vornith supply lines that only species who had lived under the Empire's rule for decades would know. High Lord Dravik, ruler of the Vornith Empire, heard reports of the growing unrest but dismissed them without much concern. Earth was a young, weak species recently admitted to galactic society, without a real fleet, without real allies, without the strength to matter. The execution of one ambassador, in his mind, had simply confirmed the natural order of things. He ordered his fleets to continue their slow advance toward Earth's outer colonies, exactly as planned, confident that no real resistance waited on the other side. He had no idea that Earth's response was already moving faster than any fleet the Vornith Empire had ever launched. Out near the edge of Vornith territory, a patrol officer named Yelter had grown used to quiet shifts. His small squadron guarded a supply route running along the border of human space, a route the Empire now treated as little more than a formality, since Earth's ambassador had already been dealt with and its people, according to every report Yelter had read, were far too weak to cause any real trouble. Nothing on this route had changed in months. Then, without warning, every sensor on his ship lit up at once. Yelter barely had time to call for reinforcements before 3 human vessels dropped out of hidden approach vectors, weapons already firing. His squadron had trained for years against slow-moving cargo raiders and small pirate crews, nothing built for ships that moved this fast, that reacted this precisely, that seemed to know exactly where his defenses were weakest before he did. Within minutes, half his squadron was disabled. The rest scattered, sending frantic warnings back toward the Empire's core systems, warnings that would arrive far too late to matter for this fight, and far too late for the Empire to fully believe. This was only the beginning. Admiral Grace Holt commanded the operation from the bridge of Earth's lead battle carrier, a ship built in complete secrecy over the past 4 years, hidden in the shadow of the outer solar system's asteroid belts where no Vornith scout had ever thought to look. She watched the tactical display update in real time as reports came in from a dozen simultaneous strikes across the border region, each one hitting exactly where Ambassador Ward's final message had told them to. Confirm status on Blackwell Station, Holt said. Disabled, not destroyed, came the reply. Matches the plan. We want their communications intact, just controlled. Holt nodded. Ward's warning had given Earth more than coordinates. It had given them time to plan a first strike that did not simply react to Vornith aggression, but got ahead of it entirely, hitting supply lines and patrol networks before the main invasion fleet could ever fully form. Back on Earth, in a research facility outside the capital, Sten Larkin sat surrounded by screens filled with decrypted Vornith files, the same files Ambassador Ward had spent his final months quietly gathering. Since returning home, Sten had thrown himself into the work without rest, driven by something he could not fully explain to anyone who asked. It was not simply grief. It was purpose. Layer by layer, the files revealed more than fleet positions. They showed patterns, the same slow, patient method the Vornith Empire had used against a dozen smaller species over the past century. Friendly trade talks, gradual dependence, and then, once resistance became impossible, quiet annexation. Earth had almost become the next entry on that list. Sten flagged 3 additional systems the files suggested were next in line for the same treatment. Information Holt's fleet used within days to open contact with those very systems, offering something the Vornith Empire never had, an honest alliance, built on shared danger rather than false promises. Word of Earth's counterattack reached High Lord Dravik within hours, though the reports that reached his private chambers were carefully softened by advisors afraid to deliver bad news directly. He was told of isolated incursions and minor losses, language chosen to avoid alarming a ruler who had spent decades believing his empire untouchable. Dravik dismissed the reports almost immediately. A handful of border skirmishes, he said to his gathered council, does not make a war. This is a young species reacting emotionally to the death of one diplomat. Let them tire themselves out. Our main fleet will arrive within the month, and this foolishness will end. Commander Rask, present in the council chamber, said nothing, though something in the reports troubled him more than he let on. The tactics used in these strikes were too precise, too well planned, too perfectly matched to information that should have died with Ambassador Ward. He did not yet understand how much Ward had managed to send before the transmission was cut. He would learn soon enough, and by then, it would already be far too late to undo what had been set in motion. Across human space, news of the early victories spread quickly, carried not with celebration, but with quiet, steady resolve. Earth had not gone to war seeking conquest. It had gone to war because a man who believed in peace had used his final moments to make sure his people would never have to guess what was coming. For the first time since the broadcast of his death, humanity began to feel something new alongside its grief, the growing, unshakable sense that it might actually win. Commander Rask had commanded soldiers for over 30 years, and in all that time, he had never once believed he would find himself defending Vornith territory rather than expanding it. Yet here he stood, in the war room of the Empire's largest shipyard, staring at a tactical map that grew worse with every passing day. High Lord Dravik had placed him in charge of the Empire's defense personally, a punishment disguised as an honor. Rask understood the message clearly enough. If he could not stop the humans now, after ordering the very execution that had somehow started this war, then the failure would be his alone to answer for. The shipyard he now defended was the heart of the Empire's military strength, the place where its largest warships were built and repaired, protected by 3 defensive rings and a garrison larger than most planets' entire militaries. It had never been seriously threatened in over a century. Rask intended to make sure it never would be. But the reports coming in from the border grew stranger by the week. Earth's fleet did not fight the way Vornith doctrine expected. They struck supply lines instead of frontline ships. They withdrew from battles they could have won, choosing instead to preserve their forces for targets that actually mattered. And worst of all, they seemed to already know the layout of Vornith defenses before ever engaging them. It took Rask longer than it should have to understand why. Every tactic Earth used matched, almost perfectly, information that had once existed only in Ambassador Ward's private reports, files Rask himself had ordered searched and confiscated the day of the execution. Somehow, some part of that information had survived, had reached Earth in time to shape their entire strategy. The realization arrived at almost the exact moment Earth's fleet did. Admiral Grace Holt's forces struck the shipyard from 4 directions at once, timed precisely to exploit gaps between patrol rotations that Rask himself had approved months earlier, gaps that had never mattered until an enemy who understood them perfectly arrived to use them. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Vornith Empire had faced in generations. Human ships moved in coordinated patterns that adjusted in real time, sharing tactical data faster than Vornith systems could track. Allied forces from 3 smaller species, drawn to Earth's cause after Ward's broadcast, struck the shipyard's outer defenses from angles the Empire had never bothered to reinforce, certain no one would ever dare attack from that direction. Rask fought back with everything the shipyard could offer. He rallied his garrison. He personally led a counterstrike meant to break Earth's central formation. For a time, it seemed almost enough. Human losses mounted. 2 Allied ships were destroyed outright. But Holt had planned for exactly this kind of resistance. As Rask committed his forces to the counterstrike, a second wave of human ships, hidden until that moment behind the debris of earlier fighting, struck the shipyard's central command tower directly, cutting off Rask's ability to coordinate the rest of his defense. Within hours, the shipyard's main defense grid fell silent. Rask himself was found among the wreckage of his flagship, alive but unable to continue the fight, captured by a boarding team under Holt's direct command. He said nothing as he was taken into custody, though something in his expression suggested he finally understood the scale of the mistake made the day he ordered Ambassador Ward's execution. News of the shipyard's fall reached High Lord Dravik within the hour, and this time, no advisor dared soften the report. The Empire's greatest military stronghold, untouched for over a century, had fallen to a species Dravik had dismissed as harmless only weeks earlier. For the first time since the war began, Dravik felt something close to fear. He ordered an immediate retreat of all remaining fleets toward Vornith Prime, the Empire's homeworld, abandoning the outer colonies that had once seemed so easy to seize. Advisors who had spent years assuring him of the Empire's absolute strength now spoke in careful, uncertain tones, unwilling to promise victory any longer. Across the newly freed border systems, word of the shipyard's fall spread even faster than the news of Ward's execution had. Species who had spent generations under Vornith control began to see, for the first time, the real possibility of an empire that could be beaten. Earth's fleet did not celebrate the victory for long. Admiral Holt understood, better than anyone, that the war was not over. The Empire's home system remained, along with its ruler, its remaining forces, and whatever desperate plans a cornered power might attempt next. The final battle, everyone now understood, would not be fought at the edges of Vornith space. It would be fought at its very heart. By the time Earth's fleet reached the outer edge of the Vornith home system, High Lord Dravik had already stopped pretending things were under control. The war room beneath his palace, once filled with confident officers reporting steady conquests across dozens of worlds, now held only a handful of advisors speaking in careful, worried voices, none of them willing to be the one who suggested surrender. Dravik stood at the tall window of his private chamber, looking out over the capital city that had never once, in his entire reign, feared attack. Vornith Prime had been considered untouchable for longer than most species had existed as spacefaring civilizations. Its defenses were built on the assumption that no enemy would ever get close enough to matter. That assumption no longer held. Earth's fleet arrived alongside 3 allied species, their combined forces forming a slow, deliberate ring around the system's outer defenses. Admiral Grace Holt did not order an immediate assault. She understood, as Ward once had, that some battles were won before a single shot was fired, simply by making an enemy understand exactly how much they now had to lose. Dravik sent an envoy within hours, offering terms of peace, the same kind of careful, generous-sounding language his empire had once used on Earth itself, promises of shared territory, of trade agreements, of a future built on cooperation rather than conflict. Holt reviewed the offer personally before responding. Her answer was short. "We have heard this offer before," she said, "from a man who is no longer alive to regret trusting it. We will not make the same mistake twice." The siege began the following day. Earth's forces targeted the outer defense platforms first, disabling rather than destroying wherever possible, a strategy Holt had insisted on from the beginning. This was not a war of extermination. It was a war to end an empire's ability to threaten anyone else the way it had threatened Earth, and the way it had threatened so many smaller worlds before them. As the siege tightened, something unexpected began happening within Vornith Prime itself. Species who had lived for generations as servants and laborers within the Empire's own capital, groups who had never been given any voice in Vornith society despite generations of forced service, began to rise up in small, scattered acts of resistance, inspired by the sight of an outside force finally proving the Empire could be beaten. Dravik's own guards found themselves stretched between defending against Earth's fleet above and controlling unrest within the city below. Commander Rask, still held in custody aboard Holt's flagship, requested to speak with the Admiral directly as the siege entered its second week. Holt agreed, curious what the man who had ordered Ward's execution might have left to say. "You have already won," Rask told her. "Continuing this siege will only cost more lives on both sides." "Then tell your emperor to finally offer a peace he intends to keep," Holt replied, not one meant to buy time. Whatever Rask said to Dravik through the channels still available to him, something in the Empire's resistance changed within days. The outer defense fleet, already weakened, began standing down in sections, officers refusing to send their remaining ships into battles they now understood could not be won. Dravik made his final offer 3 weeks into the siege, delivered not through an envoy this time, but in person, broadcast across every channel Earth's fleet could receive. He spoke of ending hostilities, of new terms, of a future where Vornith and Earth might exist as equals. Holt listened to the entire broadcast without interrupting. When it ended, she gave her answer in front of the same audience. "This is not vengeance," she said. "It is the cost you were warned about, by a man who believed peace was possible right up until the moment you proved him wrong. We are not here to destroy your people. We are here to make certain no other species ever has to receive the same warning Ambassador Ward gave us." Within days, the Empire's central government collapsed under the combined pressure of Earth's siege and the uprising spreading through its own capital. Dravik was removed from power by his own council, replaced by a provisional government willing to accept terms Earth considered fair rather than convenient. The war, in the end, lasted less than 4 months. Months later, on the same trade station where Ambassador Elias Ward had given his final warning, a small memorial was built at the exact spot of the broadcast, a simple marker bearing his name and a short line from his last transmission. "Do not wait for another warning." Sten Larkin, now leading Earth's new diplomatic corps, stood before that memorial on the day it was unveiled, surrounded by representatives from a dozen worlds that had once lived under Vornith rule and now stood as free, independent partners of a growing alliance led, unexpectedly, by the very species the Empire had once dismissed as harmless. Earth had not asked for this war, but it had answered the warning it was given, and in doing so, had changed the shape of the galaxy for every species still watching.